At least, we will never have to be hand-wed. Mary's voice tinkled through the vows like the start of spring over pebbles. Era, and I. Osrith looked up, as the black-haired girl leaned over to Gormleth, as if pretending to whisper something of interest to her, glancing back slyly now and then to Osrith. Until harvest next, be only in your thoughts, only in your heart and only a hand away. Osrith said nothing. If Muir had asked directly, rather than hinting back there in her tent, she would have told the queen that she would never wed, not even as a jest with Tadg. But what a thing for a servant to do, Mary continued, as a far-away-looking Gormleth turned to her and looked at her grinning cousin, to be dressed as a bride then refuse the queen's offer. It makes you think she might be married already, or want to be, or that she is a castaway princess from a far-off kingdom betrothed to a Danish prince. The words slipped hotly from Osrith's lips. On realizing what she had said, Osrith forced her features to remain as they were. This was horrifying, and the best she could hope for was that the girl thought she was making a boastful jibe. Chani Muk, Kalin, EU Coltarkrare tilde negation Hail. She added, her Gaelish mangled but her message getting through. Mary promptly stopped smirking, her face sinking into faint solemnness as the hand-wed couples walked in procession behind Queen Muir and King Flan. 88,888,888. The marriage ceremony continued into the afternoon, with singing of songs and feasting and ale, a speech from Flan Sinner which consisted, as far as Osrith could tell, about the long and illustrious copyrightal ancestors. Now, as the Sinca began their stories of the Gaelic royal family to their sated audience, of the journey long ago of the ancestors, of the great Fian Macamhail, and the Conan Macmorna of Dermond, seducing grain as if he were the Gankna himself. Next, came Neil no Agawalach, the first of the copyright as they sang about the 9 hostages, and the Hill of Hostages, where the story takes place, and they brought up people to represent the 5 from Irian and the other 4 from Alba, Wales, Britain and France, as they recounted Neil as he fought against Eochaid, in the legend. When each time the name Eochaid was spoken, boos came from the Gaels from Alba, Finolai, Fergus and Tadg banging their fists and drinking tankards as they showed their Olgunsta Domhnall, against his cousin in Strathclyde who had made him and Constantine exiles. 2 of the Queen's maids had taken Neil Gla tilde superscript owned Ubban Malcolm to bed and Osrith had been promptly returned to the warrior's tent to dress in her proper clothes, as uncomfortable as they were around the middle. It had burned difficult with the ties, as Finolai had done them up well, but Osrith had folded the dress carefully for Muir had given her clear instructions that she must care for the boys at the Senate when the High King was elected. "What's wrong?" Finolai asked, when she had slunk back in next to them later on. "Nothing." Osrith looked away, angry with herself that she had said what she had to Mary, and now, getting tired, her annoyance was showing. She looked at Finolai, her face downcast, and Finolai moved closer, his concerned round face looking inquiringly at her. She should be feeling light and free, as she had done that morning. Now the summer fires burned, cinders drifting high into the heavens as the myths and legends were told. But she could not. Had she given herself away? Had she condemned herself after everything, after over 2 years of hiding by a snappy retort to a spiteful girl? Now, all her mind was occupied with was how to get hold of a sword to fight her way out of this, or abscond. "Nothing I can help, anyway," Osrith added, as the main sinker got to the story of Finn tricking Benandona. "Come on," Finolai said, sitting closer. Osrith folded her arms and looked away. "Tadg's sorry about the hand wedding," Finolai whispered as the sinker's voice rose to its climactic pitch, the audience enslaved. "He doesn't think you and he will work out the year." Osrith, staring as she was at the sinker, felt her heart lightening. She turned to Finolai, and laughed. It was the first time for so long, as far back as she could remember and, at first, Finolai thought she was crying as she cradled her head into her knees, but when she threw her head back, as the audience applauded the play, he laughed too. Several people turned their heads and stared at her, and she got up, striding towards the hedge at the back of the banqueting field. "Come on, what is it?" Finola asked again, touching her shoulder. Osrith turned to her friend, and sighed. "I'm just disappointed with myself. I said something out of turn." She looked east, towards the shore, towards the land where her brother was. Where her brothers were, the thought suddenly appeared. Elfric had married her mother and she had had a baby boy. "I'm sure Domhnall will put it right," Finola soothed, putting his arm around her shoulders. At this point, Osrith had usually wriggled away from him, for she hated being touched and instead they would fight, but it was comforting today. "Besides," Finola continued, waving his hand towards the storyteller's enthralled audience, "this is a wedding. Things get said, ale gets drunk, there's plenty of merriment. It'll be the sake tomorrow night, probably worse, for it's the king's night. All of Irion will be celebrating." "Except Connacht and Munster," Osrith said, remembering. "Well, those particular kingdoms don't properly count," Finola replied. "They're a bit like Pitland and Strathclyde 50 years ago, before Sained Macatildalpin. They need us Gaels to show them how to live, or they would remain as wretches with no leadership. Like the Saxons, the Britons everywhere were nothing without leadership." Osrith nodded, though didn't quite understand. Why was it any different to the invasions now? Just that she was a Saxon and Finola and the royal house he served was Gaelish. The Britons were like they were now with the Norse and the Danes. If the Norse and Danes were on a holy mission to get Christians to convert to their gods, all invaders murdered for land, even the first king of the Idings, leading his people onto the Northumbrian shore, flame high in his hand, as legend told. "I'll see you later, I have a long day tomorrow," Osrith said, as Finola waved back to Fergus, the dark red-headed boy noticing their absence as the sinker took their leave and Flann was on his feet again. "You are going to miss the bedding ceremony?" Finola's eye caught Domhnall's. "Yes," Osrith replied, as if it were obvious. "Who on earth would want Yobi around for that?" Finola took her hadged and gave it a quick squeeze before Osrith walked off in the direction of the shore, before rejoining the celebrations. The dark blue sky overhead felt heavy as she trod over scrub and gorse towards the sea line, heavy as if new stars were waiting to be pushed into existence into the canvas of the blackened heavens. What was she to do? There was nothing that could be explained away if Domhnall, or any of them, inferred her identity. Play dumb and make a plan of escape from wherever to, where? Wessex. Stones had given way to sandgrass and Osrith slowed her pace. What would her marriage though have been there? She had seen Ch'artan of Dumham, and his son, bandaged face Sven. She would have been nothing more than a piece of flesh for bargaining, and her uncle would have her back, if she were discovered amongst the Picts and Gaels, for a similar purpose. Feet reaching the flat strand, Osrith heard a voice call her name. But she didn't stop, though she knew the owner of the voice. On, and on she trod, but Constantine did eventually catch her up. "Aren't you supposed to be at the wedding feast?" Osrith said, trying to chide him. "When we were last on a beach, you lost your sword, for me." "And a man lost his finger," Osrith replied. "Better than your." She looked down to his groin. "And then Findlage died, and now we are here." Constantine stared at her, his chest breathing in and out rapidly. He had clearly had to catch up with her. Now, in the moonlight, he did not look like the young man who had tried to rape her last night, more the child she remembered. Vulnerable, motherless, fatherless. "I sat here yesterday, till the morning," Osrith continued, setting her feet onto the sand, "before I had to wear the dress your aunt gave me." Thay Nakladar Tilda Lane. Constantine, walking next to her, grabbed her hand, suddenly, in the same manner that he had used to declare, when they were at Dunnottar, she had to do a thing because he commanded her so. Osrith let him, closing her eyes as the part of her that wanted to flee was maneuvered into silence. He felt such a different young man to the one of the night before, almost shy, revering, and he held her hand almost as if it were made of glass as the stars sprinkled down their tiny lightlets onto them. How could one day be so different from another? A shiver went up Osrith's arm as Constantine held her hand tighter, reminding her of his strength, and this time it was his companion, not the royal prince, who turned. Osrith pushed her lips onto his, as she put her hands to his face, waves of shivers passing down her face and neck and to every periphery of her body. Constantine returned her kisses, his own lips pushing back, hard, mirroring hers. He slid his hands onto her shoulders and moved them down, tracing the straps of her leather jerkin, then pushing his fingers up underneath her shirt, onto her skin. They dropped to the sand, the waves roaring softly behind them. And afterwards, they lay on the sand, warm from their bodies, and watched the sky until the pale grey line of dawn hastened them back to Dara. 88,888,888. Will it please Mebleth Dog, Lady of Sovereignty, to take the High King of Ireland, to wed the land and to protect Christianity in this Isle of Arion? It was warm. Osrith stood by two fidgety boys around the Stone of Destiny as the four kings proposing to be High Kings stood equidistant. Around them, the UA-N-A-Diarus royal family made a circle, those of the northern and southern, of Flan's my kingdom, their families behind each king, silent. Other royal families were also there, in support of Flan, those who owed their Olgans, the Eglar, whose lands they had stopped in to buried Findlaith, and the Ua Saint Scylla, of Leinster. As dawn broke that morning, Osrith crept back into the warrior's tent to find her dress, happening on Finolai, who was doing his own creeping in. "Come on," the black-haired youth encouraged, shaking out her dress so that the embellishment twinkled and, as he carefully bound her up in it, explained the process of choosing a high king, that it was unlikely the other kings would succeed in gaining the position, given the power Flan Sinna held. "All those princes and princesses he keeps safe at Temrian," Finolai went on, "to educate and take care of, their lives at risk should any of their kin turn on Sinna. And I am not altogether sure that Domnall was right when he said he and Constantine were not hostages too," Osrith thought, as she thanked Finolai for dressing her, before hurrying up to the tents belonging to the servants of the royal family. She should have been sleeping there that night, Osrith thought, with the other servants, being obedient, not nestled in sheltered rocks holding Constantine's hand. And there would be little time to rest today, as she cared for Grubbeeknees and his little cousin. "You're awake, Ronade," one of Muir's servants said, when she saw Osrith standing in the tents, having slipped in with another two girls. And she gave Osrith some bread before directing her to the boys, who were lively and energetic as she took them in procession with all at Temrian, to St. Comesill's church for a service of prayer for the new High King, whoever he may be. Now, once the abbot at Kells had finished his service at Leo F8 !Eel, the huge destiny stone where they were now, the council of nobles from all of the royal families were to go off to the meeting hall next to the church and deliberate. Osrith understood what Finolai had meant now. Here the most powerful man in the whole of Irion was going to begin his high kingship, as defender of God the Almighty and by marrying the land, as in pre-Christian times, the Irion pagan gods and traditions undistillable in this land. And, while Domnall's favourite warrior was cynical and he ribbed Tadg about it when he was bored, it somehow seemed appropriate. They weren't separate like the pagan gods, either the British, or Pictish, nor Gaelish, or Strathclyde, whose old gods had died quickly under Christianity. Jaitha, her mother, had been avenged, and had been taken to marry her father to secure lands in Cumbraland. But, even now the Danes had taken it, and installed their own king, according to the monks' letters back at Doia. Perhaps that land was the most similar to Irion in its retention of the old gods in Christianity and new. Elfric had married Osrith's mother to secure same lands, and to continue to secure it, he would probably wish to marry a woman of King Guthfrith's kin, perhaps a sister. In Inglaland, Strathclyde and Pitland too, the old gods were nothing but shadow, yet here in Irion, they were living, as real as the sun and earth and water, and speaking of them appeared to be the king and the priests merely communing with the land over which they ruled. The High King would indeed marry the land, for the land and the people's Christian faith were one. And, Osrith thought, he would do as Finolai suggested, use that oneness of being of Aryan to mobilize themselves against the Norse, and that included the ritual of kingship, done correctly so all could see that he who would be chosen was chosen correctly. The service was coming to a conclusion. All 4 kings offering themselves over the others stood next to the stone and placed their hands upon it. Osrith looked round. Would Donchada oppose his father, as Tadg suggested? She looked over at the tall, chestnut-haired prince, son of Flann. He remained stolidly behind his father and made no gesture to place his hands on the stone and declare his intention to be king of all Irian. But someone did. Through the people strode a man, black of hair and iron face as pale milk. He loped around the king's retainers, long-limbed and determined, striding up to the stone of destiny. All watched as he placed his hands on the stone, as the other 4 kings had done. "I am come," said the king, "as Ralad, king of the Ulstermen, to claim high kingship." He spoke as the other kings had spoken, Flansinna of king of Tara, and the southern Uanil Muirdach of Eguala, who garnered support from Doio when the Ulaid battled for their lands. Raucus Abritilda superscriptoin of Br tilde copyright Ifn, another king with Ulgans to the Asina tilde copyright Ill for support against Munster, and Domnall Asina tilde copyright Ill, son of Domnall was representing the northern Asina tilde copyright Ill lands despite his stepmother, Muir, marrying Flansinna the day before, and who, Finoli confidently predicted, would fold to his new stepfather. They had to put someone forward in name only. Domnall does not have the power to be overlord. But now the king of their bitterest enemy spoke. As he did so, Osrith thought she recognized the man's features. How did she know him? Why did he look familiar? Sign A tilde inverted exclamation mark Elmac the wizened abbot announced, "Ralad, you come to claim high kingship. You must now justify your claim." The breeze blasted his braid at the back of his head. The Ulaid king stood firm, looking at each of the other kings, and Prince Domnall, as if daring them to dispute his claim. And one did. "I am Ra in Cha tilde cube Decid," Flansinna declared, his orange-red hair flying in the breeze too, their braids looking like snakes dancing a challenge to one another. The crowd started. It was true, one of the monks at Doia, who had sat close to Osrith one night on finding her reading the annals, histories, of the Irian church, and less close on finding she was not a boy, had told her the Cha tilde cube Decid were what the first peoples of Irian were called, right back into history, before the Gaels had sailed from southern lands. For Flann to claim so meant he claimed descent from the first peoples of Irian. But, clearly, sign A tilde inverted exclamation mark L would not let that be the end. He stood firm and continued his claim. He looked about those who flanked Flann, and a sneer crossed his face. "I am called the 5th, but we are the 1st, we are the king of the people of early Irian. I am the Fr Ulaid, the true Ulaid. We have remained in this land, honored its traditions, welcomed Christianity to these lands." He loomed at the kings again, waiting for them to disagree. Emainmacha was stolen from us. At this, he glared at King Muirdach, whose people were now the former capital's occupants, by the Una tilde copyright Ills. The dark man looked now across to the flaming head of Flansinna, a fact which is readily known. And then, he looked across at Muir, whose white skin only appeared more beautiful, enhanced as it was by another blue dress. "A tilde pin are my kin, Sainid Mac A tilde pin and are of my line, of Gabra tilde inverted exclamation mark en Mac de Manger." He looked across to Domnall and Constantine. Osrith glanced in Constantine's direction. She had been looking for the Prince of House A tilde pin for most of the morning. He at least had got back to the camp, for he had not been by her side that morning. "I see that you have my kin with you, Flansinna." "And I am crew within," King Flann declared. "These are my kin here, to give evidence of it." Donchada was now by his side. "His mother was your kin, was he not? And, when Neil Macht has done with the throne, then shall Donchada, of the Una tilde copyright Hill and the Ulaid, be king of all of these provinces. Who better to represent all your interests?" The king had a point. A man, embodied in Donchada the brown-haired Mac Flann representing all lines of Irian kings would unite all interests, especially if all interests meant uniting against the Norse. But Flan was not yet finished. The huge, red-haired man continued to stand his ground. It pleases the line of UNA tilde copyright tilde to represent my rule in the Doire kingdom with my cousin's son, Prince Domnall. Flan continued. Osrith watched as her once opponent stood still as his uncle, now stepfather, spoke. The line of A tilde pin are two of crew within, the Picts and Strathclyde Cymric. Flan continued, loudly so that all those assembled in the lower ground could hear, who travelled over the northern seas to the kingdom now known as Ulba. My wife, he looked at Muir, is in Jensenid, Mac A tilde pin her mother was of Forteriu, and our children will be of Cruthan. This must surely be it, Osrith thought, as little Neil and little Malcolm fought in her hands. These boys needed a drink, at least, against the hot sun. But, she did not have her clothes on. She could not conceal water for them in a form-fitting dress, not yet give it to them surreptitiously. Her heart sank as a third voice spoke. Behind Rourke, a man of his kin stepped forward. We, of the Eguala, are also First Peoples, the man said. Tyhierne tilde inverted exclamation mark N. Muir snapped, but the man continued regardless. We were once slaves to the Ullaid, but broke free of their overlordship. He looked at the faces of the nobility before him. What could he say to justify his claim? He could not compete on lineage. It was us who first embraced St. Patrick. Tyhierne tilde inverted exclamation mark Nu Abra tilde superscript O and continued. See, he is buried at Ardmacca. No texts produced in our land can be released unless they are assessed by scribes of his teaching. He looked at Muir. We are of St. Patrick. My brother's claim is strongest, not because of lineage, but because of faith. It sounded weak, even to Osrith's poorly knowledgeable ear. But, like the Angle and Saxon families, the lives of the Irish kings was like one weaving frame disaster. All the family threads had got tangled together over the centuries. Only skilled, learned people could possibly unpick it all and name a high king who was credible to all. And I say to you, Flan Sinner, Osrith darted her eyes back to Tyhierne tilde inverted exclamation mark Nu Abra tilde superscript O in, who was still pressing his brother's case, that if you claim you accrue within through A tilde pin, and you are also of Dulriata, who were themselves Ullaid, then the Ralad supersedes you. Everyone watched as Flan Sinner stared at the king of Eguala. Did Sinner have some of Muir's kin, wondered Osrith, and this was why he looked so fiercely at him? Tyhierne tilde inverted exclamation mark N was either brave to support his brother or stupid, or had been paid in gold by King Sign A tilde inverted exclamation mark L to do so. The debating continued between the kings as the sun rose overhead until at last, the abbot led the kings St. Comsil's church, Flan Sinner taking the lead, followed by the nobles, including Domnall and Constantine who, Osrith supposed, counted in the big tangle of kin, as they were U8 tilde pin. Muir took the boys when the men had departed. Neil hugged his mother very tightly as she carried him down past the other royal families, telling him how good he had been and that he would have some food and drink now. Little Malcolm was at her side and jumped when he heard the word Bayard. Who was that? Osrith asked, now relieved of her duty of looking after the boys until the reconvention of the council. She sought the warriors on this bright day and found them on a grassy bank on the other side of the Ra tilde inverted exclamation mark Th Narrogue, sitting on the grass next to Fergus. As the young man tucked into meat which was being passed around, she smiled at them. But none were smiling back. King Sign A tilde inverted exclamation mark L. Osrith prompted. Of the Ullaid? I didn't understand all he said. Did you know his sons were with him? Finolai finally spoke up. Oh, the ones you met in the beach at Lochfoyle? Finolai looked at her pertinently, mid-bite. You were attracting some stares up there, so you were, Osrith. In your pretty dress and all, but I don't think you want them remembering you took one of their fingers. Why do the Ullaid hate the UNA tilde copyright hills so much? Osrith asked, taking a flask of ale and a joint of meat. Sheikbu the answer, Copstabtine had told her. But she wanted to change the subject. It's a bit like you and Befinger, really. Tadg began. The Allied king was diminished because the UNA tilde copyright ill king's bees stung him and beseech had made him go blind. CA tilde inverted exclamation mark ek, they called him, limited sight. You see, to be king of the Allied, over all three tribes, you need to be whole of body. Tadg tore into his meat with his teeth. Now do you see why we're concerned about you, Osrith? You're one of us. One of them, Osrith mused. Yet, she could barely bask in their declaration of her as their equal. The two Allied princes had been young but revenge-driven. Their king from years ago lost an eye, the one who stole fed a sword lost a finger. And then, she realized that she recognized him. His looks favored theirs. Osrith lowered her meat, feeling her face become chilly despite the day's warmth. What if King Sign A tilde inverted exclamation mark L became High King and found out what she had done? What do we do now? She managed, changing the subject again. Wait, Finoli replied, finishing his meat and throwing the bones into the hedge. For how long? Asked Fergus, concerned. I thought there was to be another feast. Could be days, Tadg replied, lazily, stretching out against the bank of the king's enclosure. Has it been days? Osrith asked, supping some ale. It has, said Tadg, blinking into the sunlight, before find Laich. The decision over his father, Flan's grandfather, took nigh on a week. A week, groaned Fergus, his dark red hair catching the light and turning to Tadg. But I cannot see it being more than the rest of the day. Apart from Sign A tilde inverted exclamation mark L, he has little competition. He is too powerful. As the day wore on, Domhnall's warriors ate and drank and told stories as everyone waited for the judgment. Once or twice warriors from other houses came over to greet them. Tadg knew many, Fergus a few. On one occasion spoke to Osrith herself, who made it clear she did not want his company, sending the young man scurrying away, crestfallen. It was the evening when the lords assembled back around the Stone of Destiny. All possibilities had been discussed and a decision had been made. Osrith searched the faces, looking for Domhnall and Constantine amongst the 200 nobles who had deliberated and decided. All has been considered, the abbot of Kells proclaimed. The lords have spoken. This king was out hunting with his brothers when they met a frail old woman who insisted that they should kiss her before she could give them water. While everyone else gave her a peck on the cheek, this king kissed her. It couldn't be Domhnall then, Osrith reasoned, her eyes fixing on the door to the church. Though his father, Ard, had been the last king, Domhnall more likely kill a woman not kiss one. Plus, his brother was little Neil, horsewise in the future, perhaps, but not now. This woman who then transformed into a beautiful young lady, green of form and glowing with sunlight. And here was the representation of the land, Osrith thought, by a Christian priest. It would be odd in England, or even Alba, but here, you could just about manage. From the church priests led out Flan Sinner. Behind him, the three other kings and Domhnall macked find Laith. But Osrith peered behind Domhnall in the dusk light. Domhnall had looked across to someone, and that someone was Don Chada Donfalt, Flan's son. Was this a plan by the prince, as Finoli predicted? For he was coming back with the rest of the proponents. Was he supporting Domhnall? For Osrith was sure it was the prince's voice she had heard in the garden at Ardmacca. Was he supporting someone other than his father? Was he proposing himself? And it has been decided that Flan Sinner shall wed the land, and elevated to High King of all Ireland. The abbot took Flan's hand while the other kings encircled him. Flan necked on all fours, a difficult thing for he was so big, and placed his hands on the red sandstone block which formed the foundation of High, pointed stone that was Leo Fa tilde inverted exclamation mark eel. All of the lords knelt to him, touching the rock, a little crumbling into their hands, as if all Ireland included the kingdoms of Connacht and Munster. Finoli's words sprang to Osrith's ear memory. She tried hard to stifle a laugh. When Flan was back on his feet, high kingship his, he walked around the other kings who had bid, offering his hand to kiss his loyalty. When it came to King Sign A tilde inverted exclamation mark L, however, Roland got to his feet, stalking away. Osrith felt a wave of relief come over her. With the king if the Ullaid gone, with him, if they were there at all, would go his sons, which was a pity, Osrith thought, as she hoped she might be able to reclaim Feather Sword. Now, Flansinner was back to the central block of stone. He made a speech about uniting the Irish against the Norse, who wanted their lands and didn't care whether a person was BRA tilde copyright ifn, nor egla UNA tilde copyright ill or late, all the Norse cared for were land and silver. I hereby honour Domhnall Mac Constantine, of the line Alpin, Flan went on, his voice booming over the banqueting hall, our ally, our comrade, who forges new territory in Alba for the Gaels. He took Domhnall by the shoulder and drew him to the centre of the stone, showing him bodily to the nobles, to the retainers, to the servants and slaves of each of the kingdoms. We are of one kin, our territory expands and we have contained the Norse, who ravage our shores. Osrith glanced at Muir. She seemed very pleased, and was hugging Neil and Malcolm to her legs. His crown and his land has been stolen. But, there is resistance in the Isles. To show our love of our kin, this stone will be cleaved, and it will be used to crown him when the battle in Alba has been won. Behind him, a mighty axe fell. The man holding it was as big as the king, and he struck the red sandstone block with such a force that it cleaved into two. This stone, born of the Leufa tilde inverted exclamation mark eel, will be taken and cared for at Iona, so that one day, Domhnall and his descendants will mirror our high kingship in Alba. Domhnall knelt by the rock, which had been cut for him, and Flan knelt by him, mimicking his own ceremony. And now, Flan declared, his arms wide, his smile also, we are to feast, we are to play, we are to sing and make merry. Your High King says it will be so. From the near silent crowd of people around the king, an eruption of cheers and shouts of approval overwhelmed the hill of Teamrack. As servants began to be ordered about, royalty congregated, families mingled. The feast, which had been prepared at the time the deliberation over who to elect as High King, was set out on long tables around the King's Hill. No person was higher or lower than one another tonight, and the food was eaten and shared under a blue blanket of pinpricks of stars. After eating with their warriors, Osrith reported back to Muir, who, while dismissing her to go to enjoy herself, told her she must not change from her dress into her own clothes, as she had done the previous night. This brought on a smirk from Mary, who was nudged by Gormlaith, and which earned her a scowl from Muir.